You're listening to the 95Podcast from the team at 95 Network, where we host conversations specifically designed to support leaders in small and mid-sized churches. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the 95 Podcast. My name is Carolee Culpepper, and I am here with our Executive Director, Dale Sellers. How are you today, Dale?
You know, I'm very good. I'm excited about our guest today.
Me too.
I met him through mutual friends at Fishhook. I had an email from our friends at Fishhook. I think it was Shayla that reached out to tell me about this great ministry. I think he's in Colorado. And Chuck and I connected. It's been, I don't know, half a year ago now, and just hit it off immediately. And so I told him then, man, I said, I want to have you on the podcast. One of his friends, Wendell Morton, we had Carolee a few weeks ago, who did the men's ministry catalyst. But Chuck is just a fireball, as everybody's going to find out. We've already had a lot of fun. I wish we had recorded what we've already talked about. We didn't get to do that. So, but Chuck Stecker, Chuck, welcome to the 95 Podcast. We are so glad to have you today.
Honored. I'm blessed. Get to know Carolee in this process and meet her and Dale. Like you said, I felt when we met, we had a longer history than we actually had. And I think God does that with divine appointments and like-minded people that are really trying to do something for the kingdom.
I totally agree. Well, today, because I know we need all the time we can have, I want to go ahead and dive right in. So Chuck, take a moment and just kind of tell everybody your story, and then we're going to talk about your ministry, A Chosen Generation, after that. But I want to just let everybody get to know Chuck a little bit.
Well, I'm a son of the King. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm a grandfather. I go by the name of Papa, and that's probably one of the great titles there.
Amen.
I did not grow up in the ministry as so many people did through pastoring and that. I actually grew up in a little bit of business, then ended up in the military for about 23 years. I went into our military folks that may listen to this. I went in as an E1, the lowest rank, because they didn't actually have a lower rank. Had they had a lower rank, I'd have started there. It was really with the intention of doing 2 years, get it over with, get back on the block, so to speak. Ended up spending about 23 years in the military. Some of that special ops. I served in a couple of Army Ranger battalions, served in Special Forces, Green Berets, and had the privilege of serving on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, just the Joint Staff, at a time when General Colin Powell was the chairman.
Wow.
So a pretty remarkable experience. As we had discussed in our earlier conversation, through that military, we had the opportunity to live in Italy for 5 years total in 3 different places, 3 different assignments there with our family and so forth, but was led into the ministry per se toward the end of our military career. God just started really churning in me and some things. Started off when we left the military in 1994, served on 3 years on the staff of Promise Keepers, as that ministry, many will know, was just exploding. I watched it go from a staff of, I think, of about 50 some people when I joined it, as it exploded over the years up to over 300. But we knew it was a short season for us, and it was a training time. I tell people I got 10 years of experience in 3 years working in Promise Keepers as a regional director over the South Central region, over about 7 states. Ironically, Wendell Morton, you referred to, that's been on your podcast with Men's Ministry Catalyst, he had the North Central region, I have the South Central, and so we were right there together. In any event, through the years, God led us to really where we're at right now with A Chosen Generation. My passion is really seeing the generations come together. We really, A Chosen Generation is about helping churches and organizations develop a transformational, intergenerational culture. And that's where I'm at now. We've been here since 1997 in this process, helping churches do that through a various means of equipping, training, empowering, releasing things that God has given to us in terms of resources and so forth that help the local church primarily. Although we've served with the military, I've spoken with them, I've spoken with businesses, things like that. The real heart of this is really helping the local church. And I think that's why God's got us together, Dale, is our target market is exactly the same as yours, where we feel like we can be most effective in helping pastors, leaders, and understanding information, understanding transformational intergenerational culture, what it is, how it works, and how do you get there from here. So that's my story. Married, we have 3 children. We have 9 grandchildren and 2 bonus grandchildren, and then a lot of spiritual children. So we got some bonus.
What's bonus grandchildren?
Well, our daughter, unfortunately, was divorced, but in the process, I say, she traded a disabled minor leaguer in and got a first-round draft pick that's made the All-Star team ever since. So, for you baseball fans and so forth, others. But he brought 2 of his children into the mix that are just incredible young people. But our grandkids run from right now from 7 weeks to 30 years old.
That's so fun.
7 weeks.
That's so
a
fun.
Big gap.
Residing in multiple different states right now, which means I reside in the state of confusion most of the time, but they reside in geographical states. So we work through that.
Oh, Chuck, one of the things I have got to ask up front, because of what you did in the military, and specifically being Green Beret and all the special ops and all that kind of stuff, that personality type typically is very hard, very rigid. And I get that because of training, but I've taught with you multiple times, and every time all you do is gush about your wife, your kids, your grandkids, your family. Is that just Chuck, or is that something that Jesus did in you beyond the military? Just that love for your family.
That's a great statement. There was, my wife says we could trace back about 3 years prior to us leaving the military and saw a pretty dramatic change taking place in terms of priorities in me, what I valued in me. And it certainly wasn't to get promoted, and it wasn't, the next assignment. I value my time in the military greatly. Mm-hmm. And even people will tell you, from my early years in the military to the time coming out of it, I've had guys say, you're not the same person whatsoever. Mm. That wasn't the military. That was Jesus.
Amen.
And so a lot of that. But, you learn in the process, too, with the military. Leadership isn't about a dictatorial approach. It really is about gaining the casting a vision, in a sense, and people coming along with that and buying into the mission, to the point that in the military, they're worth dying. It's worth dying for. And of course, you say it from a faith standpoint. If you don't have anything worth living for, you certainly don't have anything worth dying for, or vice versa. If you don't have anything worth dying for, then you don't really have anything worth living for. You can play it either way. Yeah. Our military was a tremendous experience for me personally. I look back on the things I learned, was able to do, and that's helped shape a lot of the things I've been able to do in ministry. So
did you come to know the Lord in the military, or did you already know him? When did that take place?
That's a great question, Dale. I came to know the Lord. Let me just read. I had a salvation experience as a 3rd grader in a little Baptist church in Omaha, Nebraska. Mm-hmm. We moved so much. My parents got divorced. I attended, I think, 6 different grade schools, and even in high school, moved 3 different times and all of that. Was never discipled. I don't blame anybody for that. And part of that's my passion to reach, particularly, across the spectrum, and that. I was a chameleon Christian. If somebody says, so are you a Christian? I said, sure. I was sharing with some guys. I said, they said, well, if you died today, where would you go? And I said, well, heaven. And they said, well, how do you know that? And I said, you got to be kidding me. Look at the world we live in. God's got to at least grade on a scale. I got a C+ going into this, and that. Yeah. But then there was a very dynamic moment that came while I was in the military, that I began the process of honestly trying to be good enough with my past and some things there. I felt that if I could just be good enough, that God could love me, and I could say Father, he could say Son. And I had a moment in 1991, September, in Fairfax, Virginia, that God just put me on my knees all by myself. I can't tell you, it was in this huge crowd, and it was this wonderful moment. The angels were singing and the choir was singing, and everybody, no, it was just me and God. And he says, if you'll surrender your life to Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, he says, I've already made you good enough for everything that I ever want you to do. And that was that moment there. And it was like I was on this trebuchet or catapult kind of thing for all of those years, right? I was 40 some years old. And God just kind of laughing in the heavens and took the big blade, cut the cord, and just launched us. And it was funny because my wife had heard a speaker say one time, for all you women praying for your husbands, you better start praying for yourselves, because when God gets a hold of that man, you better hang on. Right.
That's
and
the
my
truth.
wife, I would love to have her testimony in this, because she would say she heard that and yeah, whatever. And there's some dynamics that change when a man truly gets on fire and God gets a hold of that man and he surrenders his life. Right. In terms of, she was always the one to pray with the kids, and that role that I felt God was leading me to. She goes, well, wait a minute, and just some of the things like that, So I'm very, very blessed. I've got an amazing wife that, and then honestly, you can, you look at me and you say, if it's good, God did it. If it's bad, it's a lot worse than you think. And my wife has weathered the storm on that. Trust me. Okay.
So you founded your organization called A Chosen Generation. Now, how long ago was that
we started in 1997. It was actually launched by a different name, and we kind of had a path. In the year 2000, Y2K, we transformed this, rebranded into A Chosen Generation. And we were really targeting with rites of passage for young people, and we had seen the power of that. And in a very short time, God guided us in that it's not just about that rite of passage, but it's about intergenerational ministry. And we kind of wrestled with that, and we've continued to wrestle with that, and constantly in this shaping to the point of saying it's really about the intergenerational culture. It's not a program or a device or you do these 3 steps, but it's about this transformational culture that brings the generations together, Carolee, because we know us older folks, we do better when we thrive around young people. I think before this was recorded, I was telling you, we got a granddaughter that called, and I'm 25 minutes into a conversation and then realized that we had this and I had to get down here. But pouring into lives, got to be with her on our campus in March. But the young people that I meet with, I get stronger in the process. So we know young people are crying out for older people that will believe in them and invest in them. That's a given. And I will go as far as saying the problem that we have right now is with the older people. Okay. We created the discipleship problem. I just had this conversation with some young people. We're the ones that, and the problem is you talk to older people and say, man, you need to really invest in these young people. Very quietly, what they won't tell you is, but what they're feeling is either disqualified or unqualified. And frankly, might as well get the elephant in the room out there with seniors. I don't like the word seniors. I call them the Encore Generation. I'm trying to bring them in for an encore. We'll get into that in just a minute. But I try to tell them, to engage in the process that their life has qualified them to invest in a younger life.
Why do you think they feel disqualified or unqualified?
Because if you look at the percentage of children and grandchildren of the Encore Generation that are not walking in their faith, look at it. Just look at the numbers. It's staggering. And I will tell you, as you walk through what we would call the seniors, I call the Encore Generation, and we can talk about that in a minute. They look at their own kids and their own grandkids, and they go, I can't even lead my own family. How can I pour into somebody else? And they really feel that way, but they won't talk about it till you draw it out. And you talk to men, particularly across the nation, about what percentage of their own children and grandchildren are fully engaged in faith, not just going to church, engaged in their faith. And it's such a small percentage. And I will tell you, I think I just met with a guy yesterday. We got out together that I've known for years. He's 78 years old, wrote the book, The Intergenerational Church. And he made the statement. He says, the American church is in real trouble if we don't change.
You can take the last part off of there. It's not if we don't change, we're in real trouble.
We're in real trouble.
It's beyond if we don't change. And one of the things that's happened is the pandemic, who everybody's has such distaste for it. But I think the pandemic's been the greatest things that ever happened to the church, because it's exposed all these things that we've been knowing we needed to deal with, that we have not dealt with. Now we have to deal with. And one of the things we already do at 95 Network, we're doing it for years, is we talk about how to bridge the gap, about how to solve the generational gap. When I was a kid growing up, the generational gap was basically 3 generations, but as people living longer, it's 4 and 5 sometimes. Well, you don't solve that just by ignoring it. And it's really cool how you brought in the fact that sometimes the reason we don't want to deal with it is because as we're older, we're like, hey man, I didn't even do well with my own kids. But we've all got to get over this. There's this thing called grace that we cannot exhaust. It's unbelievable. And we've got to embrace that grace and let it prepare us to minister, to impact. I mean, our kids need us. Our grandkids need us.
Dale, let me tell you a story. I was speaking years ago at an event, and I won't go where or anything. And they had a couple that was kind of our support team. They handled all the administrative. I did the speaking. And on the book, I'm talking about rites of passage, but we were talking about engaging and why the young people have walked away from their faith. And so often it's the way the church is structured, where we've set them apart.
Yep.
We've just completely moved them away and farmed them out for somebody else to raise. And we hire a youth pastor to do that. But the guy was he was a full colonel, combat veteran, many tours, neat guy. But I watched him just starting to break. And after this was over, he was sitting there with his wife, armed that, and he was in tears. And I said, buddy, I'm not going to ask you if you're okay. You're not. I said, the question is, do you want to talk about it? He says, Chuck, everything you're talking about just keeps hitting home. He says, our daughter is not in church, her and her husband. Our two grandkids are not in church. And he said, Chuck, on the way up here, we had a conversation. I had to pull off the road with this conversation. And we've been talking about, why aren't you in church? You were raised in church, and our grandkids. And she said, Dad, you need to understand, I don't believe the same things you believe. And he says, I'm sorry, you were raised in church, you were in youth group and all of that. And she said, Dad, most of that I did to honor you. And it was a social gathering. She said, but when I got out of church, she says, I don't have to do that anymore. I feel like I've honored you. And she says, I don't believe the same things about the church that you believe. And that's why they're not there. And he was just crushed because he thought he had raised, his daughter in the church. And I will tell you, this is a conversation with a younger group of people, couple about church. And they said none of their friends are in church, and their community, they're the only ones in church. And I said, I blame the baby boomers, okay, as much as anybody. And here's why. We sought to pass on our faith instead of create a safe place for them to find their own faith. We didn't create a safe place for them to ask the tough God questions like, does God exist? How do you know? And how do you know Jesus is the one? We didn't allow that. We just thought if they were in church, and we always use the term passing on our faith. I don't know about you, but I don't have enough to pass on. I don't. I work at it every day. I needed that. But what I do have, I believe, and you use the word, the grace, okay? What I do believe is God is working in me to give the grace to these younger people to develop their own faith. I have a very good friend, and maybe at some point you'd want to talk to him, but he really taught me, and he says, our job is not to provide the answers. Our job is to create a safe place for someone to ask the questions that only God can answer for them.
See, Chuck, when I grew up, you weren't allowed to ask questions. I'm turning 60 next week, so I was a teenager.
I got socks older than you,
and they probably smell worse than I do. Anyway, when I was growing up in the 70s as a teenager, it was like the most horrible thing to ask God a question, to question anything. And I'm like, but he already knows. I mean, I'm not the smartest guy on the block, but I'm like, okay, we don't pray honest prayers because we're trying to pray a formula, and we can't ask God hard questions because it might make him mad. And that was the generation that I grew up in. And I didn't raise my kids that way. A couple of things that I did, and one of the things I think that you'll appreciate is, I don't have another term to use for this, but I had 3 daughters, and I kind of did like a bar mitzvah for them when they turned 13. And what I did was I had my mother and my mother-in-law and my sisters, and then their best friends' mothers come. And that night I asked them to answer one question, to write them a note to my daughter and answer one question. What do you wish someone would have told you when you turned 13? And so they wrote that answer down, and then they came to the house, and I did a cookout, and then lots of tears. I'm the first one to read the letter to my kid. And I did this for all 3, for Tiffany, Hannah, and Lydia. And I looked at them at that night, and I said, here's the deal. And we laid hands on them and prayed for them. I said, if you ever reach a point in your life that you just don't know the answer or what to turn to, and you feel like you can't talk to mom, or me talk to one of these ladies and created that opportunity for them to have somebody they could ask honest questions to. We didn't do this growing up, and I don't think we do it much now.
Let me tell you, I love what you said. You said bar mitzvah. The term is actually bat mitzvah.
Good.
And it was created in about 1947 in New York by a rabbi for his daughter. Her name was Judy. And she says, why can't I have this? And that was, I mean, when you go through this, it was literally this. And reading articles, and of course, it was interesting, that whole article. They had this whole movement going with Jewish women in Florida. And they talked about this whole movement down there that they had never had their bat mitzvah. And they were going through their bat mitzvah because the ceremony was so important. They had missed it. And there was this whole movement of Jewish women in their 70s and 80s requesting from the rabbi to go through a bat mitzvah. True story.
Fun.
Okay. But you find that, and you jumped into that rite of passage piece.
Yeah.
We don't do that in the church at all. Young people have to leave the church to become an adult, and they have to leave their parents' church to become an adult.
Isn't that amazing?
Because of how we've structured it. I've had churches say, well, we don't want to do it. I had a church say it was just too ritualistic. We, this and that. And they're struggling right now. And we're watching as the young people are segmented out. I just saw, and I've asked them to give me the source. I saw it this morning about the 75% of kids that leave the church, the 25 that stay, and it went through the characteristics of this. And I had seen other statistics on this, but one of the key characteristics in this was the number of other adults engaged in their life relationally, other than their youth group and their parents. Okay, that's key, because the youth group, they're obligated, the youth leaders, they're obligated to do that. So you've got that, but they're still segmented away from it, right? And I had a youth pastor one time, I'm talking about the youth group, the students and this and that. I'm not a fan of youth, I'm a fan of students. There's another reason. But the reality is, he said, well, you don't understand. He said, I prefer you call them youth church. Our goal is to build a separate building on the land that we have so we can have it. And he made this statement. He said, me and my pastor are, really in pretty good agreement on this, working together and partnering on this idea. And I'm going, you're both dumber than rocks. Okay. You're both dumber than rocks. But here's the interesting thing. They were doing a rite of passage, but it was against the desire of this youth pastor, but he couldn't voice it. But the senior pastor saw the need in this, but it never continued because of this. And now neither one of them are at the church, and the church after that struggled significantly. Hey, let's talk about the Encore generation for just a second.
Why don't you dive in there and lead us where we need to go?
Yeah, because
hey, Carolee.
Yeah, this good friend of mine, I played golf with him yesterday, and Pete and I, gosh, we hadn't seen each other, but he wrote the book, The Intergenerational Church. He's been at this, and he's 78 years old. And the church he goes to now is a young church, average age of about 30, he said. Cool. And, he and I both had been in churches and around where the average age was deceased. So that was kind of a new thing, it was just walk through this thing. I mean, I've been in groups like that, trust me. Okay. And we were talking, he said, I've done some studies on my own. I don't have the empirical data, but I'm going to throw this out to you. If we can get 5% of the seniors in a church engaged throughout the church, not just in seniors ministry. One thing I would challenge pastors listening to, examine your church, and they'll say, well, our seniors are involved. I want them to ask the question and look deeply into what are they involved in. And the question I would ask is, are they involved in any ministries other than senior ministries? Got their own church service, they got their own Sunday school, their own bingo class, their own mission trips. Now, by the way, they took that tactic from the youth ministry that evolved out of the 70s, 80s, and 90s of separating everything out. And they said, fine, we built this church, we're going to do the same thing, right? Yeah. So he said, but if we can get 5% of the seniors engaged in the church ministries to other generations, that alone will transform the church. 5%. Okay. Now, so here's why I've changed. It's actually a pastor down in the Villages, down in Florida, taught me this. We were at a conference and we were sitting there, and I'd seen Chris, and he said, we refer to him as the Encore generation. I said, I got it. I am too now, just like that. I tell people I saw Andre Bocelli, my wife and I, our son and grandson, and, went to this thing. It was a gift, and we were so blessed. 3 encores he did. And we had been talking about this for several years, encore versus seniors, over the hill, top of the hill, under the hill gang. Okay. But I don't know. I mean, all of those are crazy. But bottom line is Andre Bocelli did 3 3 encores. They were amazing. Now, guy's blind. He's being walked off the stage, right?
Mhm.
But here's the deal. Here's the deal about an encore with great performers, that we've got to get to these, what they call the seniors. Great performers are prepared for the encore.
Mhm.
Great performers know everything they've done in life to this point. They know what they're going to do because they know what's really good that they've done. Right? And very often they realize what they're going to be remembered for is their encore, not the concert.
Mm.
That's so good.
Think about it. When
Well,
they
that's
bring
so
them
good.
back on stage, I watched Michael McDonald of the, he used to be Doobie Brothers, and he did all of the Motown hits.
Yeah.
Man, there he was ready. Andre Bocelli, he was ready. And when we walked out of there, what everybody was talking about was that encore.
That's so
Mhm.
good.
They were ready. They knew what they were going to do, and they knew that's what they'd be remembered for. Now, think about that for seniors, right? Their life has prepared them for this moment. What are you going to be remembered for? Going out gently, dying, without causing too much of a problem, and leaving some money for some, I don't know. It's all crazy. I tell our kids, we're spending their inheritance. Get used to it. They don't have it. Our inheritance is us being with them now. That's what we got. We fly to DC and all of this.
I know they love that.
Think about this for seniors, Dale. Here, you're going to be 60. I'm 75 this year.
Are you really 75?
Oh, buddy, let me tell you. And I feel good.
Yeah,
Okay.
feel good.
So I'm praying for the spirit of Caleb because of this encore. And this Caleb, remember, he came out of the desert at 80.
Yeah.
Right. And he said, now let's go. Everybody thinks, okay, you're out of the desert. Everything's great. Read the facts. 5 years he fought alongside serving Joshua for the other 11 tribes to take their land. That's what he did. It was 85 when you read it that he said to Joshua, okay, time's now. I'm as strong now as I was when you and I went into the land as spies. And I love this statement. This is my clarion. This is my cry. Give me my mountain. He was 85 years old, but it didn't end there. You read the history of it. Took 5 years. And remember, he led the tribe of Judah. What came out of that? I don't know, the Christ child, David, other things. I mean, nothing big out of that tribe. But he fought for 5 more years to take the land that God had promised to the tribe of Judah, right? So, I look at this and I say, okay, it's time to go to work. I got things to do. But it's that idea of this encore. Everything I've done in life has prepared me for this moment. And this encore, I know what I'm supposed to do. And people say, well, Chuck, what do you want to be remembered for? And I said, well, I don't, and the difference between, I'll throw this out. Too many seniors are living for their legend, calling it a legacy. They're living for their legend instead of God's legacy. And the difference is when you live for your legend, you're so concerned about what you'll be remembered for when you die. When you live for God's legacy, it's about what people will remember about God when you're gone because you lived. Think about that. It's not about what people will remember me for because I lived. It's about what will people know about God when I'm gone because I lived. That's the legacy.
So how do you equip the Encore generation for connecting with the younger people? I mean, what are some things, good tips, advice that you could give?
Well, one of the things that we do, I don't have one in my hand right now. We wrote a book called If You Passed Your Baton, Take It Back. Now, the concept of this, Carolee, is very, very simple. Everybody's telling them, pass your baton. I was at a conference doing a workshop, right? And the guy next to me was doing a workshop on passing your baton. But now get this, we did that. I did 2 of them. So the first one, the room was packed, held, 60, 70 people in this thing, right? And his room was right next to me, and he had about 15 people in there. And he was teaching them the old hymns and pass your baton gracefully. I mean, people like that, you just want to slap the snot out of and hope they can get smarter. Okay. Those are Southern terms. Okay. Because,
yes,
I forgot.
Yes, they are.
No, wait a minute. I forgot. You guys are in South Carolina. Those kind of people, you just want to slap the snot out of them, hope they get smarter. Bless their little hearts. Okay, see, as long as you finish it with that, you got it.
You got it.
Bless your heart.
So for our northern people listening to this, they don't have a clue yet. But in any event, the second workshop came and the word had got out, and we got like 80 people in there, and it's standing room, and they're carting in chairs. You know how they stack them, bring them in on 2-wheelers? I mean, they've got 3 people bringing in chairs. and they're stacking and throwing them out. Well, two of our people went to this guy's workshop because they'd heard enough of me.
Yeah.
And he had 9 people in there. And so he announced, he says, just so there's no confusion, he says, this workshop is passing your baton. And I don't want to confuse it with the other workshop next door about if you passed your baton, take it back. And out of his 9 people, 5 of them got up, walked out, and walked into ours.
Oh,
They're
no.
excited about it when they hear the truth. So think about this. We often take secular terms, right? And we try to say them spiritual. Like if we, if you say it like Morgan Freeman's voice, it's got to be God speaking, hey,
Of course, yeah.
Man's got a voice.
Yeah, that's the voice. Okay, so think about this. We've taken this term, pass your baton. What does that mean? Remember this, when a runner passes their baton, they have to do 3 things. They have to quit running, they have to get off of the track, and they have to stay out of the race. If they even jog along and encourage the runners, other than standing in their one little team space, right? The team is disqualified. It's called pacing. If they're moving on the inside of the track with them. Got it? Now, here's the other part that just kind of gags me. You got a line in which you can't start passing the baton before that line. And you got to stay in your lane. And then you have to pass the baton before you get to the next line. I go, is that garbage or what? All you're saying is we're all created exactly alike, every single one of us. And that's not what God says. We're as different as every snowflake. And he knows us he names us by the hairs on our head. And, you can go through all of this stuff. And so bottom line is we tell people there's a difference between passing the baton and passing the mantle of leadership. There is everything biblical about a guy named Dale Sellers saying, man, I need to pass some of the leadership and share the leadership with a young lady. We need to have that voice from a young lady in this. We need to have that generation. Yes, he's a father, but a grandfather. We need to have somebody that's a mother right now raising kids. We need to have different voices, and I want to share the leadership. So in effect, what he did with you, Carol Lee, is simply this. I believe he passed a part of the mantle of leadership to you, but he didn't pass the baton. This guy's on the track running the race. So we're telling this Encore generation, get back in the race. And one of the things is when Paul says, I fought a good fight, I finished the race, kept the faith. You cannot finish a race you quit on before the finish line. You haven't finished it. You're done. You quit early, and there's still a race to be run. So we're trying to help them. And we teach churches. I've got a pastor up north, and he'll say when he did the baton seminar and the ceremony and gave batons back to his seniors, right? He went from about 5% of the seniors on their Wednesday night dealing with the children's ministry and the youth to now it runs over 80%. He cannot keep them out of the church from serving all of the younger generations once. And what happens at a baton seminar? Well, the ceremony, by the way, is there's actually just a normal racing baton. And the message is given, and then all of them from age 65 and up come forward and stand there, and the batons are in baskets or boxes waiting under there. And the staff stands there, and all the younger generations are called up, and they take a baton. And they stand in front of this so-called senior. They hold it together, and this is being modeled on the platform with the senior pastor or lead pastor with someone, there. They're holding it together, and they don't release it until the younger generations, all the younger generations, pray a blessing over the seniors about how bad they're needed in the church. And when that happens, you see, this weeping. And I had a guy tell me he's holding this baton. He said, I've waited for 10 years to hear this from my church that I still had. And he's got his trophy wife there. By the way, a trophy wife isn't the young blonde that can't cook. Okay. That he, traded out. It's the one, this guy had this one for over 50 years. That's a trophy. That's a
there
trophy.
You go. Yep.
And his, in there, and she's holding his arm, and he says, for 10 years, he has cried so much, the collar on his shirt is soaked. And he's holding this with a death grip. And he says, I have waited for over 10 years to hear this, right? But then it doesn't end because they're still holding the baton. And here's all the younger generations there, right? And here's the seniors sharing this, and they pray a blessing over every generation in this church. And then part of the seminar is helping churches understand, how do you engage? Part of it is they get a personality test, they get a gift test. Do you know how many seniors are amazed to find out they still have a personality and gifts? No, I mean, really, seriously. Yeah. It's one of the highlights of this. They're sitting there going, wow, this is it. Yes, and so forth. And that discussion, you have to cut down and say, okay, you're going to have to continue this when we do the seminar. But for whatever reason, and God says in his word, the gifts and calling are without repentance. They don't go away. Yeah. So those gifts you had, they're still there. Use them. And sometimes they're greater than enhanced.
Do you think that the retirement mindset of America feeds into this a lot? I know that maybe the seeker movement or the attractional movement, I tell everybody we're kind of living in the residue of that, has affected this somewhat. But do you think it's the retirement mentality? Because I've literally had people tell me before, hey, we paid our dues, we've done our job at church, and now we're done. Do you think that feeds into that, or does it not really affect it at all?
I think it feeds in it. I think they feel excluded from the church because too many churches are saying, okay, we got to reach this younger generation. We got one chapter in the book that says you can pray, stay, and pay, but you can't play. They don't want them involved. You'll run off all these younger ones, when in fact, so many of these young families, the moms and dads are coming in with their young kids and they're longing for, I kind of use it as that, Carolee, this will not make any sense to you, but Dale may get it. But the old show Wagon Train with Ward Bond, and everyone was about taking it. You don't get it either, Dale. Okay. But every show on TV back in the 50s was Ward Bond leading.
I was born in 62.
East to west, all the way across. And there was always the scout out front. But all of these people had already been there. And I had a couple tell me, a young lady says, can I talk to you? And young, she had grandkids. She said, I can't believe hearing this finally in the church, because it's so true. And she says, in the church we were in years ago, raising our kids, well, they put us all in these young couples groups with young kids. And she said it was terrible, and we didn't realize it. All of our kids had snot noses. They all had colds, and we're diaper training, potty training, and trying this and all of this. And she says, we would just get together and just commiserate. And she said, because we were all at the same place. And it was like we had lost hope. It was like, just God, get us through this time frame, right?
Do you think that,
one thing, Julie, an older couple just popped in. Their kids were raised and gone. They didn't come in to lead the group. They came in to sit and just be present. She said their presence with us changed everything. And we started turning to them, and they were just amazing. And it restored hope into us as parents, having an older couple come in and share. Now you said, do you think, go ahead, Carolee.
Oh, well, I was kind of thinking sometimes the older generation, I think, maybe feels like, or our society kind of makes it seem like they don't have as much value. And so I think, it's this kind of a mutually beneficial thing too in the church. Like, it's great for young people to get to know older people, to realize that they are people and they have so much wisdom to give. But I think it's probably really good for the older generation also to have some of that sense of value restored.
Oh my gosh, Carolee, every secular study tells us they're actually building senior living facilities by design near grade schools. You know how you used to have the class mom that would come in and clean up the glue and put the paper away or prepare the next project, right? They're finding that having grandparents in there, one of our churches that is just overwhelmingly understanding and bought in, Pastor Stephen, he now has grandparents in the Sunday school classes. Grandparents were thrilled with the opportunity. And I was doing a men's conference at a church, but I saw the signs of Grandparent Appreciation Day, and they had a K-8 school there, right? And I said, so that's kind of neat. And he says, oh yeah. He said, we have a dinner there and we appreciate him. I says, so, and like that K-8, school, what do you 50, 60 people sometimes? He goes, oh no, Chuck. How about 400 grandparents?
Wow.
Come in. And because a lot of them that come in now, when they're given the opportunity, they don't even go to the church. but they're given the opportunity to be present with their own grandkids, to have value there and that. No, we know that these seniors live longer, healthier, and more productive lives when they're around young people. The energy comes off of that. It works both ways, Carolee.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, I think too, when you have a relationship with somebody who's in a different area of life than you can put a face with a name, and it's not just something that's foreign, like, oh, I'm, 17 years old and I don't really know anybody in their 80s type of thing. Knowing somebody like that just increases, I think, familiarity and, like I said, value.
Carolee, in the last year, combination of our church and other people that heard and so forth, and I have met with young people from the age of 13 to young people to the age of 80 that just wanted to meet. Okay. I was at a graduation party last Sunday, the high school graduate who I've met with on multiple occasions, a young lady, she says, I've got to see you. She says, I just want to talk through my major with you and talk about college with you. Just that simple. Young man came into a men's group, 24 years old. And before he left, he says, any chance you'd meet with me? I know you meet with people, right? And go through that. Absolutely. And look, part of it is what we got to teach seniors, and that is to look available. And they go, oh, Chuck, how do you do that? I said, okay, let me just start with you guys. I want you to remember back before you and your wife got married. They go, yeah. I go, okay. Did any one of you ever have difficulty walking into a room single, looking available? Did you ever have a problem doing that? And they kind of look and they smile. I said, don't look at each other. Look at me. Every single one of you guys knew how to walk into a room, make eye contact, look available by your posture, by your face, by your smile, by a gait. You knew how to do that. Hey, buddy, you haven't lost that. Quit walking in looking like some old curmudgeon, right? And here's the difference. This friend of mine, I told you, he wrote a book, Sage or Curmudgeon. You reach a point in life where you get to choose. You get to choose. Will you be a sage that people will turn to? And younger people say, man, just being in the room changes things periodically. What do you think? And my granddaughter, I mean, she called today to talk to me about her summer classes and maybe extending her college by a semester because of some of the things and this. And she just needed to process. My wife's listening, but she said, she just needed to process. She didn't even need your answer hardly, but you got it. But she just needed to process. An old curmudgeon is that thing that lives under the bridge and everybody doesn't want to be around them, but you have to tolerate them because they're in the family and in the church, and the church tries to move them off to a separate room. Get to be a sage or a curmudgeon. That's your choice.
I'll tell you this. So growing up, we went to a church in Piedmont, South Carolina. But I will say there are two ladies who I remember vividly, probably the only two that I could name from that church. And one we called Ma Brown and the other we called Grandma Taylor. She wasn't my ma and she wasn't my grandma, they weren't, but they were just available. Like they babysat a lot of the kids in the church, like at their home. I remember sitting at Grandma Taylor's house and eating mustard pretzels and playing Rummy Cube. And she taught me how to sew. And like just things like that passing down, they just cared for us and they were available and they marked my life. So, gosh, I haven't thought about them in so long.
Carolee, that's such a wonderful example because the things that happen in teaching churches how to happen, let these things happen organically. I can see in your face as you recalled those two ladies. I'm looking at your face right now. And you made the statement. I hadn't thought about that in a while. And as you're thinking back on the impact of those two ladies, I can see it in your face, Carolee. And it's true. And the idea of just being present in the moment for young people, our own daughter, I mean, she called my wife and she said, Mom, says, I'm just ready to pull my hair out. Two young girls that were born 17 months apart by design because they wanted them close enough and put them all in diapers at the same time. But Billy said, my beautiful bride is Billy. She says, okay, honey, where are you at? She says, well, I'm just leaving this. She says, okay, go right to here, pull off. I'll be there in, 5-8 minutes. And she just ran up with our car and says, okay, pull them out. Give me the car seats. And she said, we can pick them up when you're ready. And it was actually the next day. We kept pajamas here, and the girls go shop and said, okay, these are the pajamas here and so forth and that. But so many other people I can look back in my life that were in a different era. And no, Dale, we've talked about the difference in ours, and he grew up in the 70s and I caught it the late 50s and early 60s kind of thing. But the people that were just present in the moment for us and those relationships, we've got to restore that value to the seniors, in a sense, that Encore generation, right? And not teach them how to come in and take over, but remind them of just being present in the moment. I'm speaking tonight. I speak to our student ministries. I call them student ministries. I don't like the word youth, because how do you talk to somebody that's a junior in high school? Why don't you come and be part of our youth? Right. And we got to change our terminology. We've got to quit calling them kids. We got to quit calling them youth. How about we call them students and young adults? And we have student ministries and we call them out for what they are, young adults. They are, and there's a lot to be said for that and to be gained in that process. So
I'm sitting with you today, Chuck, because of I'm sitting with you today because of a Sunday school teacher in the 10th grade who just loved Jesus. His name was Don Dunn. I actually got to do Don's funeral many years ago when he passed. He passed early, but I had gone by. He had cancer, and I went by. Me and my dad went by to pray with him, and I just told him he did not know this. This is 20 years later, and I went by and told him, I said, "You, because of your love for Jesus and the way you taught Sunday school, so impacted my life that I've been doing ministry now at that time for 20 years, and now." And I said, "Don, you have a part in everybody that I've ever reached." And it was just a moving thing. I got on my knees and he was sitting on the couch and laid hands on him, prayed for him. And then it wasn't much longer than after that he passed. And I got to do his part of his funeral. And I think as you've been talking, as we hit that nerve with Carolee, as we've hit that nerve with me, I think one of the biggest things that's happened to the generations is we just don't talk. If we just talked about things, we could resolve them. We have a pastor friend in Texas, and he's come up with a wonderful idea. And this is a larger church, but this is what they're doing to try to help at least get conversation going with their home group or their life group ministry, you will. They require that somebody from their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s be in every group. The church gives the questions of what they talk about that night in that discussion, but they listen to each other. And they talk to each other. I would imagine those ladies that Carolee just mentioned probably have gone on to heaven now. But if they haven't, what an amazing thing it would be just to sit down and say, "Hey, you made a difference in my life." And we, as a church, man, we've got to get to that place where we are actually just engaging with people and loving people. If you've got kids in your church and they're struggling to know what their sexual orientation is because society tells them all the stuff it tells them, you got to be able to talk to you. If they're struggling with sexual issues or pornography or whatever it may be, they don't need to be judged. They need to be talked to. And pastors that are listening right now, you've got it. This will not change in your church. You bring Chuck in and he can do a seminar and nothing will change if you don't lead this conversation. It doesn't happen in a moment. It's got to be just a complete shift in how we do church. And so, Chuck, thank you for your heart. Thank you for your passion. We'll put in our show notes how to get in touch with you, because I know you do seminars and you've written books and all that stuff. But as we wrap up today, I want to ask you this one question. We always ask everybody this question. And I want you just to share this from your heart. You're talking to hundreds of small church leaders, pastors, and leaders in different capacities right now. What's a word of wisdom, advice, or encouragement you'd give them today based on what we've talked about and where the church is right now?
We talk about intergenerational, and I define some things this way or characterize it. It's not about the programs. It's about changing the culture. Okay. As you change the culture, would you be willing to change your culture of your church so that every generation has a seat at the table? Every generation is valued, and every generation gets to serve and be served. Think about that. because you've just identified the characteristics of our family. At our table, we've never had a children's table. Never had a children's table.
Mhm.
We all sit together, just as simple. Every generation has value. Every opinion has value. And everyone has something to do. And I can remember, we've heard stories, but I can remember a 4-year-old little Michaela. And I've got that, by the way, your daughter's Hannah, my granddaughter I talked to coming on is Hannah. Okay, before you. I can remember little Michaela at about 4 or 5 years old, carrying the turkey in from the kitchen to the dining room, and everyone holding their breath. But she would go, what do I get to do? Everybody's serving. What do I get to do? What's my job? And all of the kids, everyone has a seat at the table. Every generation has value, and everyone gets to serve and be served based on their capabilities and their needs. And when you create that kind of an environment, that culture, it transforms all generations. And you made one statement, Dale, and I just want to expand. You said, if we can just get people talking, we can resolve the issues. I would suggest when we can get people talking and value the differences, we will grow stronger. It's not about coming into an agreement on an issue very often. Sometimes it's about valuing the other position on it and growing from it and still being different, but honoring that. And that's, you see so much, just because I disagree with you doesn't mean I hate you.
Amen.
Just because my position's different, but we've got to convey that. Okay. And so every generation have a seat at the table. Every generation has value, and every generation gets to serve and be served.
Thanks so much for being with us, Chuck. This has been so wonderful. We've enjoyed having you on the show. I have to ask you one more question.
What a joy getting to meet you, even in this way, Carol Lee.
Yes,
I really do. It has just been a pleasure, and I'm very grateful for that. And seeing Dale again, we almost had a chance to get together for a little while, and then that trip that was going to bring him out here got canceled. But we're going to work that out, Dale. We're going to work that out.
Okay, she said she's got one more question for you, so let's hear it. Did
the turkey make it to the table successfully?
It sure did.
Well, there you
go. That young lady is turning 15 this week, and just an amazing young lady, and so blessed. So like I said, we've got them from 7 weeks to 30 years old right now with our 2 bonuses, and the turkey made it.
That's great. Today. I love it. Well, thanks again, Chuck.
Thank you, Carol Lee. Thank you, Dale.
That was
Let me make one statement. We have resources, and any of the resources that we have, we always make this statement. You can buy them. If that price works for you, great. If a lesser price works for you, don't order them online. Send me an email, right? And if for whatever reason it's just inconvenient, but you would like to have one of our books, if you pass the baton, take it back. Men of Honor, Women of Virtue. If you just send me an email, I'll mail you one out and sign it to you. And don't worry about paying for anything or even postage. I just did this to a group in Canada. I had one guy order online and 3 other guys said, Chuck, would you just send me a book? And they went out this week. We're more than happy to do that.
Thanks for listening to the 95 Podcast. We look forward to sharing another episode with you next week. In the meantime, visit our website at 95network.org. The website is loaded with great resources created for small and mid-sized church leaders. Until next time, have a great week.